Whenever minimum wage goes up, business groups cry foul, calling it a job killer for small businesses. And it's true, a significant chunk of job growth comes from small businesses. Ontario's government says its move to raise minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2019 protects vulnerable residents who sometimes juggle several jobs with few benefits. So, will these new rules help or hurt those caught in precarious work? It's time for the big picture. Sean Spear is a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Armin Yalnizyan is an economist, formerly with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And Goldie Hyder is the president and CEO of Hill and Knowlton Strategies. Let's just set the table. I think I know everybody stands, but where are we on this? Sean, you start. What is the impact of an increase in minimum wage?
It seems to me that there'll be little doubt that there are job losses. The question is the magnitude. I suspect that some around the table will think that they're modest, and others, of course, will suggest that they're higher. But that's the conversation we really are about to have, a question of the magnitude of the job losses resulting from yesterday's announcement.
And I mean, you're a big proponent of minimum wage, and you too agree that there are always businesses on the cusp, right?
Sure, and it may be the wage increase, it might be electricity increases, it could be other input increases. There will always be something that happens that pushes marginal companies out of the picture. But let's not talk about this as a moral thing. Let's talk about this as a business thing. This is good for business. When you give the poorest workers in the economy more money to spend, they turn around and spend it. Their propensity to consume is the highest of any group out there, and that actually drums up business for businesses. In other words, consumers make jobs, not businesses.
And consumers have been carrying the Canadian economy. We talked about that with the GDP. Goldie, where do you stand? Let's just finish with setting the table here.
I'll quote the Premier's own Minimum Wage Advisory Council, and what they essentially said is that for every 10% increase in the amount of the minimum wage, that 3% unemployment drop could occur from that. So if you take that by extension and realize that this represents a 32% increase, which is part of the story here, why the big jump, that would reflect to roughly 9% drop in teen unemployment, which is what their own advisory council told her. So clearly that doesn't seem to matter.
Armin, you want to jump in?
Well, that report that Goldie was just referring to was written by Morley Gunderson, based on evidence based in the 1990s and 2000s. And if you take a look at something that has been now out for, I guess, about 6 months or so, that looked at every single minimum wage hike in the U.S. since 1938, there is no correlation between job loss and minimum wage increases. So it seems to me
we just said that that inevitably when you increase if you increase your input costs, there are jobs that will be lost. There will be businesses that close.
Yes, but if you raise the incomes of the other people that are working,
then
you
other
are creating other jobs.
Right.
I would say a couple of things. First of all, a 25% hike in a single year is a big bill to impose on small businesses in this province, especially, as Armin says, when they're already grappling with other costs imposed by this government and in Ottawa. The second, I think, an important thing, this debate, as you set out at the introduction, tends to be divisive. It tends to break along ideological or political lines. One of the most regrettable parts of it is that the report that was released last week, the Changing Workplaces Review, had broad-based support. And for some reason, and I won't debate the politics of it, the government decided to break from its review and impose this unexpected increase in the minimum wage, instead of focusing on the parts of last week's review where there was broad-based intellectual and political support.
Can I ask, though, what is the alternative? And whoever wants to jump in on this. Like, I know people that make $12 an hour. Is that what it is? Minimum is $12 an hour.
$11.40 right
it's
now.
Not enough. Like, it's not. I don't think anybody's out there saying that's a living wage. You can get by with that. And if you take that as the premise, then what else can you do? Who wants to field that?
Well, I always say it's about the framework, right? I always say it's about establishing an environment that attracts investment, that creates a competitive environment, that's about developing productivity. Now, for a lot of the viewers out there, they're like, that doesn't mean anything. But the reality is that that's the way you go about creating job growth, which then creates wage growth, and it allows people to spend. Look, I don't disagree with Armin that ultimately, ironically, that you're going to give this wage increase, and what's going to happen is things are going to cost more, potentially, and you're going to pay for it at the other end. So why not focus on doing the things that actually grow your economy, and good things come from that, as opposed to gerrymandering it by government?
you want to talk about what grows the economy, Armin.
Yeah, so we have had growth, and in fact, wage growth has not been a handmaiden of growth. So waiting for growth to raise wages is one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is to say, let wage growth drive economic growth. And frankly, the idea that this will not stir innovation is actually crazy, because when companies are faced with rising costs and they want to contain them, they get more innovative. So why would we be in favor of, why would you guys be in favor of an economy where 30% of the labor market, is earning less than $15 an hour? Ontario has been a low-wage economy for decades, according to StatsCan and the OECD. Raising the minimum wage can actually spur productivity. Isn't that what we all want?
Peter asked what we can do to help marginal workers or low-income workers. It's not to diminish or dismiss the circumstances they find themselves in, but pricing them out of the market by raising the minimum wage by 30% in 2 years is going to hurt many of the very people you're aiming to help. It seems to me a big part of the solution.
Wait a second.
We're not going to get rid of 30% of the workforce.
But not even that.
A huge chunk of them are going to do better.
We should have had somebody who actually makes $11.80 an hour, or whatever it is, to sit, because I think most people that make minimum wage are going to be pretty excited.
The person you won't have here, Peter, though, is the person who didn't get hired because the minimum wage increase has created this opportunity cost for business. But let's just agree on something.
Okay.
You talked about helping low-income or marginal workers.
Right.
One way to go about doing that without tinkering with the minimum wage is to increase the working income tax benefit, which incidentally was a creation by the Harper government to subsidize the wages of low-income workers. This is a policy that respects the market, but builds upon that for people who need
the market by taxpayers subsidizing crummy employers that pay crappy wages. How is that going to work when more and more of the population retires?
The tinkering with prices, which the minimum wage has the effect, as we know, of affecting supply and demand, and in turn hurting many of the people who Armin and I and Goldie, no doubt, want to help.
Goldie, you've been excluded. You jump in.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing here. I don't think there's anybody on this panel that's saying, people shouldn't be paid more, we shouldn't have the opportunity to earn more. Of course, it benefits them, it benefits society. It's the way in which this is being done. It's going to have a disproportionate impact, unfortunately, on small, medium enterprises, which are a large part of the Canadian economy. It will mean the invisible things that Sean talked about. Someone who is a part-timer that might have had a chance to be converted to full-timer won't be. Someone who might have been hired as a full-timer will now be hired as a part-timer. There are things as a consequence, and the data will tell us. Let's come back in a year or two and look at this. So that's one thing I will say. The other thing I'll say is, and again, I've been saying it before, I think so many of the actions that this government is taking here in Ontario are driven exclusively by the fact that they're in panic mode. We have another year before an election. They're doing everything that they can to take the NDP and the left vote out. This is being driven by politics as much as it is about good policy. How else do you explain the tuition? How else do you explain the farmer care, the hydro cut? Now this, I don't know if I or you can afford another year of what else they can come up with to try and eliminate the left. And that's part of the thing here that I think Ontarians will catch on to as well.
All right, Goldie gets last word, I'm afraid. I know, but you'll come back and we'll talk about we're going to talk about this a lot over the next year. Listen, it's important, and it's great to get all of your perspectives on this, and I appreciate it. It's great to see you all. Sean Speer, Armin Yalnizyan, and Goldie Hyder.